This is the story of a UFC legend who fired a gun from a moving vehicle on a freeway, watched his marriage dissolve weeks later, and then walked out of a courtroom a free man, all within about 8 months. Diego Sanchez, the Nightmare. The man who won the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter in 2005, competed in the UFC for 16 years, and earned a spot in the Hall of Fame. And then, in the summer of 2025, he was sitting in the passenger seat of a Jeep on Interstate 40 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, allegedly leaning out the window and firing a gun while passing by a traffic accident. According to the driver, he laughed about it afterward. That single moment triggered a chain of events ending in a guilty plea, a divorce, a 10-year gun ban, and 5 years of probation with no prison time, but a very different life waiting on the other side. Before the arrest, the courtroom, and the divorce papers, you need to understand who Diego Sanchez actually is, because without that foundation, none of what follows carries the same weight. Born on December 31st, 1981 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Sanchez grew up there, wrestled there, and became a state high school wrestling champion there. Albuquerque isn't just where he came from. His identity and the city's combat sports identity are permanently tied together, each one inseparable from the other. In 2005, a brand new reality show called The Ultimate Fighter launched on Spike TV, built around a tournament of fighters living in a house together. With a UFC contract going to the winner, nobody knew if the show would survive. Nobody knew if the UFC itself would break through as a mainstream product. And then Diego Sanchez submitted Kenny Florian in the Season 1 final, and overnight he became the face of a new era in combat sports. Aggressive, relentless, impossible to look away from. His nickname fit him perfectly. What separated Sanchez from almost everyone else on that first season was what came next. He stayed. For 16 years, he competed inside the UFC, cycling through middleweight, welterweight, lightweight, and featherweight, beating Nick Diaz, Takanori Gomi, Jim Miller, Ross Pearson, and Kenny Florian himself. His fight against Clay Guida landed both of them in the UFC Hall of Fame, inducted specifically for that single bout. In 2009, he challenged BJ Penn for the UFC lightweight title, going the full distance in a fight. Nobody expected him to survive as long as he did. When the UFC finally released him in April 2021, his record stood at 19 wins and 13 losses across more than 16 years with the promotion, along with 8 post-fight bonuses and a Hall of Fame plaque. After that, the career wound down gradually, a final MMA appearance in March 2022, a bare-knuckle boxing loss to Austin Trout at Tingley Coliseum in February 2023, and a proposed April 2025 boxing match that never happened when the card fell apart. By the time 2025 arrived, Diego Sanchez was 43 years old, retired, and living in the city that made him. Teresa Tapia carries her own complicated history in the combat sports world, and understanding who she is matters here just as much as understanding who Diego Sanchez is. Before Diego, Teresa had been married to Johnny Tapia, a boxing Hall of Famer, a beloved and complicated figure, someone the sport of boxing never quite got over losing. After Johnny passed away, Teresa stayed active, building a career as a boxing promoter and executive, remaining one of the more connected people in New Mexico's combat sports community. Diego and Teresa had known each other for years before anything romantic developed, moving in the same circles, sharing the same world. And that long familiarity is exactly what Diego described when KRQE covered their wedding announcement in January 2024. It was more like a marathon of consistency and loyalty to each other. He told reporters, adding, "In the end, it just proved to be the realest and best thing for us." Teresa put it this way: "I feel like I married my best friend, and it was the easiest thing I've ever done." Diego was the only one next to Johnny that felt like home again. The official legal date of their marriage, according to court documents that would later emerge, was December 20th, 2024. Both of them spoke publicly about building something together for New Mexico's combat sports scene, combining her promotional experience with his fighter's legacy, treating the marriage as both a personal and professional partnership. And then, according to the settlement documents filed months later, the couple began living separately in April 2025, less than 5 months after the wedding date on the certificate. Whatever broke down between them during those months stayed private. The outside world didn't know yet. And then came July 17th, 2025, Interstate 40, Albuquerque, New Mexico, westbound lanes. Officers were on the scene of a traffic accident, handling a crash the way Highway Patrol does, attending to the situation, managing the scene. A Jeep Gladiator came driving past. The officers heard a loud bang, a gunshot clearly coming from the passing vehicle, and they immediately pursued it, conducted a traffic stop, and pulled the Jeep over. The passenger was Diego Sanchez. When officers questioned him, Sanchez acknowledged there was a gun in the vehicle, but denied that any shots had been fired. The driver of the Jeep, who faced no charges, gave a completely different account, telling police that Sanchez had leaned out from the passenger seat, fired the weapon, and then laughed while speaking to authorities afterward. A search of the Jeep turned up 3 rounds on the passenger side and the firearm stored in the back pocket of the driver's seat. Sanchez was booked into Bernalillo County Jail on 2 charges: shooting at or from a motor vehicle, a 4th-degree felony, and negligent use of a deadly weapon, a misdemeanor. A few days later, he was out of jail, and his lawyer spoke to TMZ Sports, saying Sanchez would channel his energy and passion into getting better with some needed treatment and counseling. About 2 weeks after the arrest, the body cam footage circulated publicly, and it contained a moment that spread everywhere. The arresting officer telling Diego Sanchez, while placing him in custody on the side of that New Mexico freeway, that he'd grown up watching him fight, a UFC Hall of Famer handcuffed, being recognized by the cop who just arrested him. Here's what made the legal situation serious. Sanchez had no prior criminal convictions. A 2002 DWI charge and a 2023 charge of battery against a household member, both misdemeanors, had each been dismissed previously. But the specific circumstances of firing from a moving vehicle meant the potential sentence ran as high as 6.5 years in prison. A clean record didn't protect him from what those circumstances carried. After his release, Sanchez entered a not guilty plea, and the case moved through the courts during the second half of 2025 and into early 2026. And then February arrived, and things moved quickly. On February 18th, 2026, Diego Sanchez changed his plea to guilty on the felony charge, shooting at or from a motor vehicle, no great bodily harm. And as part of that agreement, the misdemeanor charge of negligent use of a deadly weapon was dropped entirely. A sentencing hearing was scheduled for later in March. But here's the thing about the February timeline, because it demands attention. 2 days before Diego changed his plea, on February 16th, 2026, Teresa Tapia filed a petition for divorce. The filing cited irreconcilable differences. It stated there was no hope for a reconciliation. 2 days later, her husband walked into court and pleaded guilty to a felony. Whether the divorce filing and the guilty plea were connected in any deliberate way isn't something the public record explains. What the record does show is this: the official marriage date was December 20th, 2024. The couple started living apart in April 2025. Teresa filed for divorce on February 16th, 2026. Diego pleaded guilty on February 18th, 2026, a marriage that lasted 14 months on paper, with the couple reportedly separated within its first 5. The sentencing hearing was set for March 27th, 2026, 2nd Judicial District Court, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Prosecutors stood up and asked for 2 years in prison despite the plea deal already in place, arguing the felony conviction warranted time behind bars. The judge disagreed. Diego Sanchez walked out of that courtroom without serving a single additional day in jail. 5 years of supervised probation, 800 hours of community service, no prison, and a 10-year firearm prohibition attached to the felony conviction, meaning the man who built his entire public identity around physical combat can't legally own a gun for the next decade or more. Because the guilty plea was part of a negotiated agreement, no appeal is coming. Sanchez accepted the outcome, and outside the courthouse, his words were direct. It was a foolish decision, he told reporters, and then continued. I look back on it and I own it and I take responsibility for it, and now I won't be able to have guns no more, and that's the price I have to pay for my wrong decision. Standing in front of that Albuquerque courthouse, he added, people do make mistakes, and this is Albuquerque, the wild, wild west. I made a bad mistake. No prison, 5 years of probation, 800 hours of community service, a felony on the record, and the divorce papers already filed weeks before he ever set foot in that courtroom. Pull back and look at the full arc of this, because there's a lot sitting inside the story that doesn't resolve neatly. 20 years of building one of the most recognized careers in MMA history, winning season 1 of The Ultimate Fighter, fighting for a world title, earning a Hall of Fame induction, beating fighters whose names still carry weight in the sport, and then somewhere in 2024, marrying Teresa Tapia, a woman he'd known for years, describing her as his best friend, as the realest thing in his life. That marriage lasted about 14 months on the legal record, with the couple reportedly living apart within 5 months of the wedding date. July 2025 brought the arrest on the freeway. February 2026 brought the divorce filing and the guilty plea within 48 hours of each other. March 2026 brought the sentencing and the walk out of the courthouse, a free man. What the judge's decision reflected is something worth sitting with. No prior convictions, no one physically hurt on that freeway, a defendant who stood up publicly and accepted responsibility. The judge chose probation when the prosecution wanted prison. Whether that outcome fits the crime is a conversation people will have, but the factors that shaped it are all on the record. What Sanchez carries forward now is specific and heavy. A felony conviction, 5 years of supervised probation where a single violation could send him to prison, an 800-hour community service commitment, and a 10-year window during which he can't legally possess a firearm. The fighter who absorbed punishment for 2 decades in the octagon, who built a reputation on refusing to go away, now navigates a very different kind of endurance. Diego Sanchez avoided prison. Legally, procedurally, on March 27, 2026, he walked free, but the list of things that didn't walk free with him is long. The marriage was already over before the sentencing. The gun rights were gone for a decade. The clean record was gone permanently. And whatever unraveled between him and Teresa in those first months of 2025, whatever led to the separation, to the July incident on Interstate 40, to the February filings, none of that has been publicly explained and probably never will be. What the public record gives us are dates, court documents, and direct quotes. A timeline that accelerated fast, from a wedding in late 2024 to divorce filings and a guilty plea in February 2026 to a sentencing hearing in March where a judge declined to send him to prison. 14 months from marriage to dissolution. 8 months from arrest to sentencing. For 2 decades, Diego Sanchez built a career on one principle: take whatever comes at you, stay standing, and keep moving forward. That identity made him a legend in the sport. And now, at 44, carrying a felony and 5 years of probation, the same principle is the only thing that gets him through what's next. He said it himself outside that Albuquerque courthouse. All I can do is take accountability, own it, and spread positivity. The next 5 years will show whether that holds